The courtroom was quiet, but the silence was not peaceful, it was heavy as if every breath taken in the military tribunal chamber carried the weight of judgment. The American flag stood behind the judge's bench, unmoving, frozen like the faces of those in attendance. Captain Evan Cole sat motionless in his chair, his hands cuffed in front of him, dressed in the standard olive drab uniform of a soldier under court-martial. His eyes were shadowed not from fear but from something far older, resignation, exhaustion, and a silence no one dared question. The prosecutor stepped forward, voice sharp, cutting through the tension like a blade on the morning of June 4th. Captain Cole input incorrect global positioning system coordinates for the air strike on Sector Delta. That miscalculation resulted in the death of 4 American soldiers, Sergeant Colohan, Private Mendez, Corporal Liu, and Lieutenant Rivers. There were no enemy combatants in the area. The strike was friendly fire, the system logs confirm. Captain Cole's ID and clearance. He had full authority, and he acted alone. There was a murmur among the observers, but Evan did not flinch. The judge turned to him, formal but solemn. Captain Cole, you have remained silent through most of this proceeding. You refused counsel. You declined to present any defense. The evidence is overwhelming. Do you have anything at all to say before this court delivers its sentence? Evan raised his head slowly. His jaw was bruised from days in confinement, and there was a faint scar along his temple. Fresh, he met the judge's eyes and spoke for the first time in the entire hearing. I am not here to defend myself, he said, voice even and low, not because I am guilty, but because there are things that must stay buried so others can live. The silence that followed was deafening. The judge hesitated for a beat, then looked down at the verdict prepared before him. Captain Evan Cole for the charges of gross negligence resulting in friendly fire casualties and for failure to uphold your duty in a combat zone. This court sentences you to execution by firing squad, to be carried out within 72 hours. There was no outcry, no shock. The room had been expecting it, but then the judge asked, "Do you have any final requests?" Evan paused for the first time. His eyes shifted not to the prosecutor, not to the guards, but toward the corner of the room where a small black and white photo sat in the file, a photo of a German shepherd with bright eyes. "Kota," Evan whispered, then louder, "Let me see Kota, please." A murmur rippled through the tribunal. The judge exchanged glances with the officers flanking him. "Your military K-9. He was decommissioned after your arrest." "I know," Evan said, "but if this is my last request, I want to see him just once." The judge sighed. "This is highly irregular," Evan said softly, "is all I have left." After a long pause the judge finally nodded. "Very well, the court grants the request. The dog will be brought to the base by tomorrow. Court is adjourned." As the guards moved to escort Evan back to his cell, he gave no resistance, but for the first time in days something flickered in his eyes. Not hope, not yet, but a shadow of something not yet dead. 3 years earlier, in a dusty training compound on the outskirts of Kandahar, Kota was just another failed Entry in the military K-9 roster injured. During a live fire drill, shrapnel to the hip, nerve damage in his back leg. He was marked for early retirement, unfit for service, not worth the resources, the report read. But to Captain Evan Cole, Kota was more than just a damaged asset. He was a survivor. Evan had found Kota lying in the kennel, silent, while the other dogs barked and paced. His ears were alert, but his body was still his. Eyes, however, told a different story. They followed Evan's every movement, calm but piercing, like he was waiting to be chosen, even knowing he probably would not be. He does not respond to standard command anymore, one of the handlers told Evan. Trauma response. He freezes up. There is nothing more we can do. Evan ignored the comment. He walked to the cage, knelt, and said nothing. He just stared back. After a few seconds, Kota stood slowly with effort and stepped forward, pressing his muzzle against the bars. The next day, Evan filed a request to take over full rehabilitation training. Everyone thought he was wasting his time, but within weeks Kota began to respond, not just to orders, but to Evan's voice, his signals, his presence. They worked at dawn and at night. Basic obedience turned into advanced maneuvering. Kota relearned how to heal, flank, search, and take cover, but most importantly, Kota learned trust. They became inseparable. The others in the unit joked that Evan talked more to his dog than to any human, but Evan did not mind. Kota listened in a way no one else could. No judgment, no questions, just presence. Then came the mission in Coral Province, a volatile region crawling with IEDs and unpredictable ambushes. Evan's team was sent to evacuate civilians from a compound surrounded by enemy fighters. While sweeping the outer perimeter, Kota stopped cold. His ears snapped forward. He took 2 steps, then barked sharp and low. Evan signaled the team to halt. A hidden landmine buried just inches from the path was triggered, but did not detonate. Kota's alert saved them moments later. They found 3 children hiding in a ruined stable nearby. Kota approached them slowly, tail lowered, posture soft. One of the children reached out, touched his fur, and whispered something in Pashto. Farish, the interpreter, translated. They said he is an angel. That was the last mission they had together. A week later, during a routine recon in the northern hills, the team was ambushed. Gunfire erupted from both flanks. The comms were jammed. Chaos in under 6 minutes. Most of the unit was gone. Only Evan and Kota survived, retreating under heavy fire. Kota shielding Evan's flank the whole way, but when backup finally arrived, something shifted. Evan was taken into custody. No explanation. Kota was dragged away in the opposite direction, confused, resisting the leash, looking back with panic in his eyes. That was the last time they saw each other until now. The heavy steel door groaned open and a wave of desert air slipped into the dim isolation chamber where Captain Evan Cole sat, chained to the floor, his eyes hollow from days of silence, barely moved. When the guard stepped aside, but then he saw him. Kota, the German shepherd, stood in the doorway for a second, as if unsure whether what he saw was real. Then his ears lifted, and without a sound he walked forward. Evan's lips parted, but no words came, only breath, only disbelief. Kota stopped inches away, sniffed Evan's boots, and whimpered just once before lying down and pressing his head against Evan's knees. Evan dropped his forehead to Kota's. "Hey buddy," he whispered, "you remember?" The room was still, even the Guards didn't speak, but that moment man and dog reunited after the silence of betrayal was louder than any gavel. A few minutes later, Major Drenner, Evan's former commanding officer, entered the chamber. With two MPs clipboard in hand. "We're done here," Drenner said briskly. "Let's move the dog out." As one of the guards approached Kota, the shepherd tensed. Then low and deep he growled. "Everyone froze." "Kota," Evan said gently, "it's okay." But Kota's eyes were locked not on the guard but on Drenner. The growl grew louder. Drenner shifted uncomfortably. "Get the dog under control." Kota stood up, ears flat, his body lowering into a crouch. "Kota, stand down." One officer barked, but Kota did not move. Instead he took one slow step forward, and another, eyes fixed on Drenner. The major took a step back. "What's wrong with this animal?" he snapped, reaching instinctively toward his side pocket. Perhaps for a signal device, or simply out of habit, but in his nervous motion his fingers fumbled and something fell to the floor, a small black USB stick, nearly invisible against the concrete. Kota lunged not at Drenner but toward the object. He snatched it in his jaws and darted backward toward Evan. The entire room erupted. "Secure the animal, hold fire." Kota dropped the USB at Evan's feet and sat beside it, chest heaving. The commanding officer from the tribunal arrived moments later, alerted by the commotion. Evan looked down, picked up the device with his cuffed hands, and met the colonel's eyes. "Run it," he said. The tech unit was called in within 20 minutes. The contents of the drive were decrypted inside encrypted targeting logs, time-stamped access credentials, edits, the original coordinates, the correct ones, and a second set manually altered by a logging code registered to Major Drenner. There was no more room for doubt. The room fell to a hush as the judge re-entered and faced the assembly. "Captain Evan Cole," he said slowly, "in light of new evidence, this court finds you not guilty of all charges. You are hereby fully exonerated." The silence broke not with applause but with relief. Audible, physical. One of the guards unclasped Evans's cuffs. Evan rose slowly, his legs stiff, his breath uneven. Kota stood beside him, tail finally wagging. Not fast, just steady like the beat of a heart returning. Major Drenner was escorted out in silence, his eyes darting between the dog and the tribunal that no longer believed him. Evan looked down at Kota and whispered, "You knew." Kota did not bark, he only looked up at Evan with those deep amber eyes and sat as if to say, "I never stopped watching." The war was over, not just on the battlefield but in Evan Cole's heart. After his exoneration, Evan quietly declined the offer to return to duty. The military had cleared his name, but some parts of the soul were not meant to return to war. He packed what little he owned, signed the discharge papers, and left the base with Kota walking silently beside him. They headed west, away from bases, from cameras, from politics and tribunals. Evan found a cabin tucked beneath the trees near a small town in Colorado. No fences, no neighbors close enough to ask questions. Just sky pine and peace. There they began. Again Evan named the land Kota Haven. At first it was just the two of them. Then one day a former Marine named Travis showed up. Travis was 27, recently discharged and haunted. He had lost his best friend in a convoy ambush and had not spoken more than a few words to anyone in months. He was sent by a therapist who had heard about Evan and his dog. Travis sat on the porch, arms crossed, head down. Kota walked over slowly, then without command lay at Travis's feet and pressed his head gently against the young man's boot. Travis did not move, not for 10 minutes. Then quietly tears fell. He reached down and rested his hand on Kota's back. That night words spread slowly, not through advertising but whispers. Veterans who felt broken came. Dogs from shelters, many abused or abandoned, were paired with Them Kota became more than a symbol. He was the spirit of the place, walking silently from one soul to the next, sensing which heart needed presence, not pressure. Evan began to write. He put their story into words carefully. Honestly, the betrayal, the trial, the dog who had saved him in more ways than one. He started a podcast simply titled The Quiet Ones. Every week he shared stories of veterans and dogs who had helped each other survive. It spread far beyond what he imagined. Downloads from all 50 states. And then, overseas listeners wrote letters. Veterans called in, some cried, some just said thank you. And then one morning a letter arrived from Cabo, written in careful English. It was from a boy now 17, who had once been pulled from a crumbling building by a German shepherd with amber eyes. I remember his fur. I remember how he stood between me and the fire. I am alive because of him. I want to become a doctor so I can save people like Kota saved me. Evan read the letter twice, then a third time. He sat at the edge of the porch, Kota beside him as always. He folded the letter, set it down gently, and buried his face into his hands. He cried, not out of grief but gratitude. Kota nudged his shoulder with his nose, then leaned against him, quiet and still. Evan whispered through the tears, we did it. Boy, you save more than me. Kota did not move. He did not need to. The seasons passed quietly at Kota Haven, and with each year the grass grew softer, the trees taller, and Kota slower. His muzzle had turned silver, his gait had grown stiff, and though he could no longer leap up onto the porch as he once did, he still greeted each morning beside Evan, ready for their slow, steady walk around the garden trail. Evan never shortened the path, he just walked slower to match Kota's pace, and Kota, for all his age, still kept up each step, heavy but proud, as if he knew the trail wasn't just a routine but a promise. The veterans called it Kota's round. Those who joined them in the mornings walked quietly, respectfully, knowing they were walking behind something sacred. One evening, just as the sun began to dip behind the hills, the air dipped cooler, still golden. Evan and Kota sat on the porch, shoulder to shoulder, like they had countless times before. The light painted long shadows across the lawn. Wind whispered gently through the pine. Evan looked down at the dog beside him, his oldest friend, his quiet guardian. You saved me more than once, he whispered, even from myself. Kota didn't lift his head. He just shifted slightly, exhaled softly, and rested his muzzle against Evan's boot. His eyes closed, his breath slowed, and there, in the most peaceful silence, Kota slipped away. No pain, no sound, no fanfare, just the soft stillness of a warrior finding rest. Evan did not move for a long time. He sat with one hand on Kota's back, the sun fully gone now, night wrapping gently around them both. The next morning the entire sanctuary gathered at the edge of the woods beneath Kota's favorite tree. Evan had carved a small wooden marker himself. No marble, no metals, just words that said everything. He gave me back my name when the world tried to take it. Veterans laid small tokens at the base, dog tags, notes, folded bandanas, not in grief but in gratitude, because Kota was never just a dog. He was proof that even when the world is broken, love, loyalty, and quiet courage can still hold it together, even to the very last breath. Some warriors carry no rifles, some truths are never spoken aloud, and sometimes the ones who save us do so without ever saying a word. Kota was not just a dog, he was a witness, a protector, a quiet force of loyalty in a world that had forgotten how to listen. He did not just save Evan's life, he gave him back his identity, his honor, and his will to keep going when everything else had fallen apart. In a time when justice seemed buried, Kota uncovered it with nothing more than instinct, trust, and love. No courtroom speech, no plea bargain, just a stare that saw through lies and a heart that refused to give up, because Sometimes justice does not need a voice. It only needs a pair of steady eyes and a soul that never walks away. This was Kota's legacy, and this is why we remember him. Thank you for joining us on this unforgettable journey, the story of Kota, the loyal German shepherd who proved that some heroes don't wear medals, they simply stay. If this story moved you, reminded you of the quiet power of loyalty, or made you believe once more in second chances, please like, share and subscribe to Amazing Pause Stories. Here we honor the unspoken bonds between humans and their four-legged guardians. We share stories that heal, that inspire, and that remind us all sometimes the greatest acts of courage. Walk quietly on pause, hit that subscribe button and join a growing community that believes in compassion, connection, and the extraordinary power of animals to change lives. This is Amazing Pause Stories, where loyalty lives forever.